Bart, how are you feeling, by the way?
Not 100%, but better.
Okay. Because, I mean, it is rare that you miss
I know.
an appearance here on
I was
this show.
out. I was curled up in a ball in bed for 3 days last week. So yeah.
Oh. I mean, we're talking like above and beyond the chicken noodle soup and just
Yeah. Yeah.
wow. That is not something to be envious of.
It
And
was not fun. I mean, I had to miss that Atlanta United game for it. I had to, it was not a fun week for me.
all right, and
You missed a hell of a drunk game, so there's that.
Well,
yes, yes, that is true. I mean, we've got a lot to get to this week. We've got Major League Soccer. We've got the national teams to talk about because somebody else's Atlanta United price tag, I think it's safe to say, just went up for
Caleb Wiley. I mean,
yes.
you just can't teach finishing instincts like that, man. That is fantastic. You watch a kid who, it wasn't an easy putback. Let's just put it that way. I think that, people are like, oh, this just happened. They want to give Brandon Craig all this credit. And well, the goalkeeper saved that shot. They didn't save Caleb Wiley's shot. So that's all I'll say. And, Caleb has become a very integral part of this U20 team. Started on Saturday at in the left wing back position. Gets to come in yesterday, scores his goal. Has been a very important part of this team. I think it's nice to have him there because he is versatile. He can play left wing or left fullback. And for this team specifically, we're missing a lot of attacking winger talent. And so he's able to kind of, obviously Cade Cowell missed the first match because he got had to serve the red card suspension for this stupidity that happened back in U20 qualifying last year.
Mm-hmm.
This is dumb. So Caleb's been able to help this team with his versatility and truly because he is a good player. I mean, we've seen it here in Atlanta that he is a very solid player, both going forward and defensively. Technique wise, showing out on the U20 level is awesome because again, we've seen this here in Atlanta. I think he gets overshadowed, right? You talk about Jonathan Gomez. A lot of people are super high on Jonathan Gomez, and nothing against Jogo, but Caleb Wiley to me is steps ahead of that when it comes to a professional soccer player. Part of that's because he's been playing professional soccer a lot more consistently than Jogo. Jogo obviously going to the Real Sociedad B team. Hopefully he gets to make that step up. I think he's probably at that age where he needs to start actually playing first team minutes. But Caleb's been doing it here in Atlanta for a while. And to your point, yeah, I mean, Atlanta United is going to have a very interesting winter 2023 window because I think we are all focused on the summer, rightfully so. I mean, we're going to have to replace several players. We're going to have to offload several players. Hopefully, we actually cut ties with certain players. I mean, I'm really looking forward to the day that Marcelino Moreno is no longer on our books, but that's just me. I know other people think that Marcelino Moreno is actually a good soccer player. I've never seen that, and that's okay. You can be wrong. That's okay. But it's going to be interesting as we look at the winter window when you're still. Maybe Jarrett, maybe John. I don't know if like the Almada replacement necessarily happens in the summer. But regardless, we're probably having a designated player type signing this summer, obviously. But in the winter, when we're going to be replacing, hopefully, Miles Robinson, because he's going over to Europe finally, probably replacing Caleb Wiley, which I know he's not technically the starter at left back, but he's played in every game that he's been available for Atlanta United. And I think that'll be interesting to see how the winter transfer window works for Atlanta United with all these players that will be exiting soon, as well as just cutting dead weight.
Well, I mean, he's starting at left wing right now because he's the best option you got there because your signing to play left wing has not done what you needed him to do.
Yep.
So you've turned to a situation, honestly, that I think could repeat itself on the other side of the field this week with Luis out. We'll get to that in a minute.
Mm-hmm.
I would be fine if you played Ronald Hernandez at right back and Brooks Lennon at right wing.
Yeah,
Going into
I
Orlando.
think that's honestly the best option with Luis out. I didn't like Etienne on the right when we saw that down in Miami. That also
Ironically,
could
I
have
loved
been
Luis on the left.
yeah. Well, I think that also could have been the technical setup or the tactical setup, I should say, because it was that Miami game was like the worst example of Pineda's trying to get all these players forward, but actually compressing all the space that we had. It was the worst example of that because you had like Chol and Etienne sitting right next to each other or 5 feet apart most of the game. And it was like, okay, well, you guys aren't doing anything. So hopefully we don't see that on Saturday. I would prefer Brooks on the left or on the right with Hernandez behind him. I think that would just make more sense.
Yeah, I think Brooks up, Ronald in, because what we've seen from Ronald in the last handful of matches, he's been one of the best players out there for Atlanta United.
Well, I think he just brings defensive balance.
Yeah.
He brings balance to the force because right now the problem we've had for Atlanta United for a couple of months is that, and this is again something that I think Pineda's system doesn't account for very well, is you have Brooks and Gutman not playing fullback. I mean, they're not defending. Let's just call it what it is, right? The problem is both of those players get extremely high up the field. It's not just, oh, well, they make a run every now and then. They live up there. And that forces our defenders to be both stretched wide, but also account for the middle where you only have Ibarra maybe staying home. And so having Hernandez, who's not as willing to get that high up the field, gives them some actual defensive cover. But, I'm sorry, I'm not here to talk about how Gonzalo Pineda actually is somewhat culpable for the bad run of form we've had recently. I know that's we're not allowed to discredit or to criticize Pineda, I'm sure. But
we are all about honest and earnest discussion here. That has always been the case. It has always been the case. We can always talk about every aspect of it. We got the space to do it. That's why we do it.
Yeah.
But what's the cup today?
Oh, it's just water today. Again, we're trying, but shout out to the company that we work with and come to us better together. Anyway, yeah, I think Caleb is going to get a very nice transfer. I'm hoping he doesn't go the route of George Bello before him, who kind of demanded to go to a top league.
Yeah.
That has not worked out. I think Caleb, if you're listening, I know you're probably not, but Caleb, if you're listening, it's okay to go to Belgium or Netherlands. They're very good leagues. It's okay to go to France. That's a very good league, and you would do well to find yourself at a place like Lyon, Marseille. Hey, there's an American now over there in Reims, however you pronounce that word. I don't know. It's French. They just kind of put words together and pretend it's a sound. But that would be a great spot for him. I really do think that a league that utilizes attacking fullbacks but still expects you to defend would be a great league for him. I do think that he could make it in the Bundesliga. I think don't think that those are the only things you have to go. It's the same. It's the same thing I say to kids getting recruited for college, that UGA is not the only school in this state that has athletics. There are other places in this country that have good quality athletics where you'll actually learn how to play the game better too.
Oh, and you mentioned George Bello. Arminia Bielefeld right now is in the zone of a possible back-to-back relegation.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I think Bello just picked a bad club. No. I don't even think it was that he picked a bad league. He just picked a bad club.
He picks a club, and then the manager that wanted him gets sent away after a bad run of form, and then the manager that's brought in doesn't really either A, know what to do with George, or B, wants nothing to do with George because he doesn't fit what he wants to do. So it's a combination.
But Pro-Rel makes team players better, John. That's what I've been told.
Oh, man. I forget that. let's see what Jarrett, what else is on your mind? Because I know we've got to do reffing down here, and I know we've got some other stuff. But what's on your mind with Bart?
Okay, let's just do that then, because you had two sending off in this game. The first one goes to Bart. It looks like for mistaken identity discussion, and then I mean the second one from Luis we can talk about, because I it's one of those things where I think it's one of those moments where I want people to live in the gray and understand that two things can be happening at the same time. First off, I think it's a super soft yellow, but also I can't have a player who just got a yellow card repeatedly trying to grab that guy and giving him an excuse.
Yeah. Let's tackle the Luis one first, because I think people are like, oh, that was soft. And I agree it was soft. But I think had he not just gotten that yellow card, he would have been given a yellow card for that no matter. I mean, that was a yellow card, right? Like, it's one of those where, like you said, it's not that he necessarily fouled him harshly, but he tried to grab him no fewer than 27 times in 2 seconds. I mean, that was the problem there. He got beat, and during the case of him getting beat, he fouled him and grabbed him. Then the guy turns to go upfield and he tries to grab him there. That was consistent also with what the referee gave a lot of yellow. I mean, Thiago Almada drew no fewer than 4 of those yellow cards just by beating guys, and they were pulling them back. It was consistent with what the referee was giving out yellow cards for the whole match. And Luis has got to be smarter than that, considering 2 minutes before that you got a yellow card. So yeah, it was soft, but it's in the area where you go, yeah, it's the yellow card. And it's not the referee's job to dictate how you respond to getting a yellow card, because that right there is the response that from a player who should be smarter, who should be more mature, who should be more experienced, needs to understand that you can't do that. Especially stopping promise. I mean, that's stopping a promising attack is 100% what that was, and he did it, and it's a yellow card. I mean, we don't have a whole lot to argue. And then he decides to not want to leave the field because he's mad that he did a stupid thing. Whatever. June 26th or whatever can't come soon enough.
And he also got an added fine for not leaving the field in a timely manner. When it comes to and I also want to get into the context of what we saw with Vinicius Jr. too, and I want to get into that when you're dealing with harsh language and things like that on the field later on. When it comes to your reffing friends and conversations that you have, we talk at times about setting a line, setting a tone early on when it comes to matches. And then there are times where after you think a line is set, then there's overcorrecting and you go back the other way. Like if you set a tone early of not wanting to flash cards, then because of you letting a game breathe, kind of like what we see sometimes from like a Fotis Bazakos. Fotis Bazakos will let the game breathe. But at the same time, it will be an even distribution of that idea. There are times with others where we will see, after letting a game breathe or calling it too tightly, we will see an overcorrection in the second half. How many times in conversation does it come up about trying to make sure that a match is called as evenly as possible and that you don't get that whiplash effect that takes the line and takes it all over the place when it comes to reffing these days?
Yeah, I think our goal is to try to be consistent as possible within a match. And to make sure that the line you've set, people understand that that is the standard for the match in its duration. I don't think this referee was that bad. I know that's mainly because, Will, to your point, the ref never had control. Name a single human who could have controlled that match. That match was out of control. It was
such an amazing. If you were a neutral, that had to be one of the best neutral watches of the year.
It was so incredible. I mean, it was a whiplash experience watching it back and forth. It really was. I think the referee, I think he was fairly consistent with when he gave yellow cards. Because outside of Clement Diop apparently getting a yellow card. It wasn't like he was giving yellow cards because players were out of control themselves. There were very specific reasons why he gave yellow cards most of the time, and it was a very consistent, you pulled this player back or you committed a stopping a promising attack foul. Now, maybe you could say, hey, there were other incidents that yellow cards could have been given, and I think that's maybe a little fair, but for the most part, he kept it to you infringed upon the game as a whole and in an egregious manner. You're getting a yellow card for this. And that's kind of what the stopping a promising attack falls into, right? Like, this is not just you fouling someone. This is you trying to stop the game from being played well. Again, Almada created a lot of those situations for the referee because he beat players and they just dragged him back. Now, you can say, oh, well, Chicago never responded. Okay, he kept giving them yellow cards for it. I mean, it's not like he was like, well, you did it one time and I'm going to tell you no, and they kept doing it and he never. I mean, he was pretty consistent. And it was. He to me was able to live in that, like, this is what I'm giving a yellow cards for. He was giving it for most of the time that it happened, and it was. I thought he managed that part. Now the whole game was off the rails. I don't think you can't just blame a referee because the game goes off the rails. There's 22 other players on the field,
right,
who also have to be in control of themselves, and we only have 3 referees out there. I think people when it comes to like arbiters on the field with these players, we have like one dude and like 2 guys with a flag. It's very different than a lot of the games that we're used to as American sports fans, especially where if you've got American football, you've got 7, 8 referees out there. Basketball has 3 freaking officials for 10 players. Like that's the ratio is very small there compared to what soccer has. I don't think that game had any impact from the referee, because even the yellow cards he gave and the red cards he gave were justified. I know Chicago felt little, but hard done. But Federico Navarro trips Miguel Berry. I mean, I know they were like mad about it. It's like, and Kendra, who
he has the initial contract.
Right, yeah, exactly. It's like he stepped on Miguel Berry's foot. Now, was he what actually called the foul? I don't know. I couldn't really get what he gave it for, but it's one of those where like Miguel got fouled 2, maybe 3 times in that sequence. Navarro was the first contact.
Well, and Navarro, I think it went Navarro, Pineda, Navarro. I think Navarro.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah,
I think that Navarro clipped him the first time. Pineda bumped into him, knocked him back to the right, and that set up second contact by Navarro. Yeah. And I think that it was that repeated contact by Navarro that gave the card.
To me, especially when you go to the VAR, you're looking for, was this actually a case of mistaken identity? And it wasn't. I mean, he fouled him and should have got the yellow card, and he did. And, it was a bad foul. Like, that was the other thing. It wasn't like he didn't not get the ball or anything. He clearly trips Miguel Berry, and you picked up a yellow card in the 3rd minute, and then you picked up a yellow card in the 24th. Like, that's on you, man.
Yeah. Since you weren't here last week, I want to go over Dogso, because the Gutman incident happened before you got sick, and now that you're recovered, we can discuss Dogso. Walk us through Dogso and what you're looking at from a refereeing perspective about Dogso red, penalty, all of these different degrees.
Yeah. So the Gutman incident was a really good example, I think, of using VAR not to re-officiate, but to allow the referee to worry specifically on about the action on the field and make sure that we're able to focus on what's happening in front of us. Because that Gutman foul, it was probably it wasn't something that in live play the referee can necessarily worry about, because you're worried about this thing going on between Miles and Swiderski over here. You're worried about that, and then you have a player that's running down the middle of the field or making that near post run to try to score. So like, I think that's a great use of VAR, right? Where you're like, hey, I have to worry about this thing over here that is an immediate danger. I can't worry about this. the reason why it's dog so is because at that point in time, Andrew Gutman, why it's a dog so red, I should say. At that point in time, the player is making a very clear effort on goal. I mean, there is an actual shot that came from that. Gutman was not making a legitimate play on the ball. And why do I say that? Because he pulled the guy's jersey. That's not playing the ball at all. So when they go back and look at that on VAR, the video assistant is going, hey, this player committed a foul that actively disrupted the ability for this player, the attacker, to go toward goal, right? Even though there was a shot, okay, we allow those shots to happen based on the laws that allow us to give advantage, right? So that follows under the advantage. You can still go back and give cards after an advantage, especially for, in this incident, a dog so red, right? Because again, this was not a legitimate, this wasn't Gutman put a foot out to try to stop a cross. He pulled the jersey back, and it was really not a very smart play by Gutman. In my opinion, I don't really think he needed to do that, even because of the way the runner was going. It was at that point in time, you have a player running toward goal, very close to goal. Distance is one of the things that we talk about in dog. So distance, direction, defenders. He's toward goal. He's close to goal. Gutman's the only defender back there, and Gutman's the one who causes the foul. So at that point in time, it meets all the criteria for dog so red. And it was, again, I think a good use of VAR to allow the referee to focus on the active play, because that Gutman foul would not have been something necessarily that the referee was looking at during active play. He was focused on that Swiderski and Miles Robinson confrontation. Not anything bad, but that's where the play is. And so Gutman's foul was during the act of that cross once it came across. So the referee wouldn't have been able to see that. I'm a little surprised the AR didn't say anything, and maybe that's what triggered VAR. I don't know. I didn't hear the audio. Because it was pretty obvious when they showed it, like what happened and why Gutman did what Gutman had done.
So your initial, I mean, even before we got into replays, before we got into VAR, what was your initial thought about that particular play? Before we got into the minutia of looking at it.
Yeah, I didn't know what happened initially, and then I saw the replay. I was like, oh, that makes sense.
Okay.
Because I was in the supporter section for that one, so I couldn't really see. I was confused why we looked at it long after that, but then as soon as I saw the replay, I was like, oh, yeah, there it is.
Okay.
Because again, in the live action, it was just like, hey, nothing happened. The guy tried to get a shot on goal, but you could see on the replay, Gutman pulled him back, and that actively affected how the guy was able to take a shot.
When it comes to reffing these days, and this is, I guess, my Vinicius Jr. discussion, and I've been wound up about this whole thing all week. I know that probably surprises a lot of folks. #sarcasm font. When it comes to what you have seen these days, either as a fan or as someone who wears the uniform, how prevalent is abuse, either from fans or from other players or from benches and things like this? How prevalent is abuse on other players these days?
That's a tough one, John, because there's always chatter.
Mm-hmm.
Just put it that way, right?
Okay.
Always chatter. Most of the time, I would say, and again, I'm refereeing at a different level than Vinicius Jr. and most of the time not in such a hostile environment.
Right.
The chatter is about the game or about it's just smack talk. It's normal stuff, right?
Right.
What I do, my biggest concern always is for me, I'm listening to what happens on the field, but a lot of the times that's just chatter between two players, and They give it to each other back and forth. You're making sure you're attuned to make sure there's nothing racist, sexist,
right,
anything abusive necessarily, but there's always chatter.
Yeah.
What I personally, and what most refs I think try to listen for, or should try to listen for, is the external noise, because we don't need that. We literally do not need anyone outside of the lines of the field to be present. We don't need them. And as the referee, I know it's hard because you're worried about the game going on, the 22 players on the field, the however many players, coaches, and other officials on the benches. That's who you're worried about protecting for that game. John, I know you cover high school football all the time, and high school sports in general, and there's a lot of abuse that gets thrown at players, but there are lines that they're not allowed to cross. We had an incident in Georgia high school soccer this year, with I think it was racism.
The Padea.
Yeah, I think it was racism. And so it's hard because as an official, you're so worried about what's going on the field, but you have to be reminded that you're protecting those players from the dingbats that are, unfortunately in attendance. Most of the time we're worried about parents being stupid, because parents are the dumbest creatures that exist. I'm sorry, parents, y'all are the dumbest creatures that exist, because all you care about is your kid.
Then let me ask you this: as you walk down that road, how can you separate your thoughts and your analysis from navigating a match within the rules of the game, to listening for chatter within the game, and the external chatter that you don't want to be a part of the game? How difficult is it to compartmentalize yet still understand that you have to navigate all three of those sections?
Yeah, it is hard. And again, this is why I go back to the fact that we only have 3 people to manage all of this. And for soccer too, I mean, you might have the 4th official, obviously the pro, but they have very limited duties, and really, if they're not they're not going to hear much different than what the referees on the field at that point in time. Maybe they can hear that it happened, right? We see that a lot in CONCACAF with the kind of 3-step approach to controlling that in matches. It's hard for them to then say, oh, well, I know who did it, or it's just hard. It is hard. And again, that's where hopefully you have, I honestly think the best example we've had of it is what happened during the Red Bulls and
San
Jose match was, I think, both, with Vanzier, who, anyway, I don't have time to get into that. I think both teams actually responded very well to that, outside of obviously a coach who probably should have done something. But even the teammates of Vanzier responded to, not necessarily, I don't think they were selling out their player. They were calling him out they said he did bad things. And I think that's what's hurting me the most about this Vinny Jr. situation, is that he wasn't even being really protected by the opponent, which has no, more than your fans. I want players to understand that they have more in common with each other on the field than the fans in the stands, right? And you guys are actually not, you're facing each other on the field to try to win a game, but you're not enemies, right? And especially in that situation where you have players from all walks of life, backgrounds, ethnicities, whatever, it's you have to help protect each other. And as referees, our job is also to help, again, to protect them. But there's really only so much we can do, because we are focused on the game at hand. We're focused on the benches. We're focused on trying to listen if that does come from the stands, and it's hard. Granted, I think the Vinny Jr. thing is a failure of the referees to recognize it, because it wasn't like it was one dude just yelling at him.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was at that point, you know, it was a whole stadium. It felt like doing.
And now there's also discussion that in some circles that the 3 steps are not enough, and that
Yeah.
you've got to be faster on the trigger. And if you want to jump from step 1 to step 3, you ought to be able to do something like that.
I can understand that too, because I think there's a difference between an isolated incident and what we saw in Spain over the weekend, where it was a whole stadium participating in racist behavior. It's kind of the issue I think a lot of people have had with the CONCACAF's response to the chant that Mexico uses, is because this isn't one person saying it. This is a coordinated chant, you know, and that's different than one person or a group of fans saying it. When it's an entire block or stadium, why are we giving them second and third chances? In my opinion, that's the question I want to ask: is why do they deserve a second or third chance when they've clearly shown that they know the boundaries and they still cross it?
First step, the stadium announcement warning abuse should stop, as was heard in Spain. Step 2 in the FIFA process, after any further abuse, only urges the referee to take players off the pitch temporarily while fans are warned the game could be suspended if the abuse continues.
Mm-hmm.
And then Gianni Infantino, in his advice column on his IG stories, decided that he said that, you know, hey, maybe you guys should adopt. You didn't offer any criticism from our friends at Sky, didn't offer any criticism of the league's handling of what was going on with the match. He just recommended that football adopt FIFA's 3-step protocol. Match restarts, then thirdly, if the attacks continue, match stops, 3 points go to the opponent. So 3 opportunities for anybody to be racially abused in their place of work before everyone's removed from the toxic environment. So that's what
per game.
Yeah.
But that's the thing, John. That's per game.
Mm-hmm.
That's not. And that's what I think, again, bothers me is if you had this in a place of work where you said a racist thing once, twice, 3 times, right? That is usually over. I mean, it could be within 1 day. I don't know. They're really terrible humans, but that usually is over a span of time. We're talking about this happening in one 90-minute period.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I think that if you have already triggered this thing once, you don't get a nice little, hey guys, don't do this again. You've been warned once. So the next match, you don't get a 3-step, you get a 2-step, right?
Mm-hmm.
After that, you get a 1-step. We hear it, we're done. Mm-hmm. We don't have time to continue to educate you all about something you know is wrong, but pretend it's not. And I'm sure Nick Alifi would love to rant about this, because I know his country has dealt with its own issues, but it's like, you know it's wrong, you just pretend it's not.
And we got into the discussion in hour number 1 about suitable punishments. And right now, Valencia is getting basically a €10,000 fine for the next 5 matches. The supporter section is going to be empty. Nobody there, but the rest of the stadium will have folks. Folks in the timeline this morning, you know, you've got all these kinds of things, and Rich Ransom's in this morning. Does anyone else feel weird that in 2023 we need to explain to MLS signees coming to the league, hey, that word in your country doesn't work here, and that they need to take a class for it? I think Rich, I think education is vital. And yes. I think that what you have to do is you have to continue to mention, and there's a great deal of context that's associated with all of the different stories from all the different countries that are bringing players into Major League Soccer. And if it has to be a continual education process, so not just the folks coming in from whatever country they're coming in, but those of us who are here in the United States can understand the context of what is being said. I think it's just as important. I think that education has to go in
Yeah.
both directions. I think that we can't sit there and say that as those who either cover the sport, officiate in the sport, play in the sport, navigate the sport, or are fans can just sit in a building and not understand the context of what someone is saying as they come into this country. We can't just sit there and say, well, it's our league and you've got to do things our way. I think that the understanding has to come from both directions going in. But and yes, Ricky, Dante Von Zier saying what he said, that's an example that we're going to put over in aisle number 6. But just education in general, I think, is vital for both sides, players coming in and for those of us who are already here.
I do think, I think that you can give someone a slight benefit of the doubt that they don't truly understand why that word in that context here is super hurtful.
Mm-hmm.
From a first chance, right? You go, hey, like that word and calling someone an animal like that, maybe, and I don't know because I haven't spent extended time over in Europe like that.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe they don't see why that is hurtful to a race of people because I don't know. I mean, I don't know how they wouldn't because Europe is the main reason why we have these issues.
The word that was used for Vinicius Jr., and I'm just going to say it this way, is profoundly uncalled for. I'm going to say it that diplomatically. You don't say stuff like that.
Right. It's like, I think it's fine to have to reiterate, like, hey, this word is absolutely off limits.
Mm-hmm.
I think you need to educate a little bit why, but I don't understand how that word that they're using, like, maybe this is my cultural ignorance of the European culture.
Mm-hmm.
I understand 100% why that's a wrong word to use.
Yeah.
For,
Yeah, exactly.
How
in certain cultures there's a lack of understanding of how a certain word that probably the rest of the planet sits there and says, that's a bad word. How you sit there and you go, well, I don't know. And, I don't understand how in my culture it's, not a bad word, but in ours it is. And in practically all the others it is. Alex, one thing that's blown my mind in the last few years is me using a common colloquialism in Spanish, stopping to dissect the phrase and realizing that there are prejudices buried in it than trying to scrub them from your brain. Ricky, live in a much more global world now where it shouldn't feel like these things are unknowns, Bart.
You would hope.
Yeah.
You would hope.
You would hope. Nothing like going from reffing down here to geopolitics down here this morning, eh?
I mean, and again, I think that the issue that most people are going to have, and I think it's, I think to me, this is the point that is underscored in all of this is, and I'm not saying that we didn't develop racism on our own, right? But Europe is the locus for a lot of these issues. Spain is the one that may or may not be attributed to the start of all this at the beginning. They funded that 1492 voyage. So, it's it's not like y'all shouldn't understand what you've done, but also I understand why they are so far removed from. They think they're so far removed from it, and it's not. Europe loves to tell us how they don't have those problems, and yet time and time again they do.
They do. So what's the latest with? Because I know that we are now in the fourth.
We're in stoppage time. Yeah.
The fourth official has put up the board.
Yeah. Hopefully we'll have some stuff talking about the U20 World Cup. I would imagine that we have the roster for the Nations League coming out not this Wednesday but next Wednesday after all the European leagues have finished.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be able to talk about both of those things, the group stage of the U20 World Cup and then that roster. Obviously, we have one more U20 World Cup match on Friday, 2:00 on one of the Fox channels. I'm sure they'll change it 7 times before this happens. I don't know. Somehow
go to the Universo and
oh my goodness. Somehow the U20 CONCACAF Women's Championship is on Fox Sports 1 tonight, but we can't get a 2 p.m. kickoff time in the middle of an afternoon on Fox Sports 1 for I don't understand. Fox is my least. I'm tired of them. I want them to just go away. I don't want them involved in soccer and ever again. I think that they are trash, and I definitely think some of their on-air talent is trash. But
we didn't even get to talk about Katarina Macario and Rose Lavelle.
I don't want to talk about those. No, I'm sad. I'm sad, John. The Katarina Macario news made me so I haven't talked about it publicly because I love Kat. She's my favorite current U.S. women's player because of her just insane ability and how she represents a true future for what the U.S. game can be like, right? Especially on the women's side, and the fact that she's it's so sad. And now we're hearing this morning that Rose may or may not be ready for this is a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, the U.S. does have the legitimate depth to deal with this. I mean, I think you're looking at possibly, I think she should have been called up before this, but Savannah DeMello coming up from Louisville City. Maybe you actually put Crystal Dunn in her preferred position as attacking midfield. Luckily, unlike England, the U.S. does have legitimate backups. But this Women's World Cup is going to be not an asterisk necessarily, but I think it's problematic that you have such an ascendancy of women's soccer right now, and this World Cup is going to be marred by the fact, not marred, is going to be slightly subdued because you're going to be missing some of the world's greatest talents. I mean, England's missing several of them. We're going to be missing one or two.
Well, but I think marred is the proper word, especially when you're talking about knee injuries.
Well, and that's I think to your point, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying they're all preventable because obviously this sports injuries are inevitable to sport. Injuries are inevitable when you freaking roll out of bed in the morning, John. I mean, we're all day to day.
I'm aware, aren't we all?
We're all day to day in some capacity.
Yes.
But it sucks that this seems to be somewhat preventative in the sense that you could have just not played as many games as you tried to force on these women, and that's unfortunate. But I think that the silver lining is you will see the depth of the game that we haven't seen before, and I think that's actually very valid. I think the biggest thing we've seen, the growth in the 4 years since 2019 to 2023, is the just depth of talent overall in the women's game, and how more women are getting to the super professional and super competitive level. And we need that, because that's the other thing is, I think a lot of the issues we've had is, and we've seen this with the U.S. women, and I think Vlatko could have done better with this, but I think he's done okay for the most part even, is it's not like you had an opportunity to rest women midweek matches because you didn't have great depth. And now you do. I mean, look, I know this is the only time I'll talk about Arsenal on this one, but the Arsenal women have been decimated by injuries. They just keep coming.
Mm-hmm. But
they're able to plug in players to the point where we still made a Champions League semifinal, and we're very competitive in that fixture, and are able to be somewhat even in the ascendancy and qualify again for the Champions League next year at this point, even though we're missing all these players. So I think that's been the greatest. We can talk about the marketing and the buzz around the sport, but from the actual competitive standard, the depth of quality and the number of quality players has increased in the last 4 years, and that's a positive. And I hope that is the story we get from this World Cup, as opposed to just, we're missing our biggest stars.
Yep, no doubt about it. Looking forward to the next go round of the Soccer4US POD with you and US Keeper and anybody else that you want to bring into the fore. And it's always good to hear your perspectives on things, whether it is Atlanta United, whether it is players in and out, whether it is reffing down here. I think that when we do the reffing down here thing, it has kind of morphed into its own thing, because I don't think a lot of folks understand about what goes through minds of officials and things like that. And the fact that we can kind of pick your brain on a weekly basis on how you process information, how refs process information, and how, frankly, we need more officials in the sport.
Yeah, I will echo that, John. You're going to have opportunities in the summer if you're interested in becoming an official. It's a great way to make some side money. I'll be the first. It's a great way for your kid to make actual money.
And don't yell at the kid who's trying to make an extra $50.
I will. Yeah. Listen, there are two things that I get defensive about. You don't yell at the players, because most of the time when I'm refereeing, they are kids as well, and you certainly don't yell at my my fellow officials who are under the age of 18.
Mhm.
I don't deal with that. Because I referee a lot with some older guys too, and you can yell at them. They will be fine. We laugh about it afterwards. But when you yell at a kid who's refereeing, oh no, that's when I lose it, because they're trying their best, and for the most part, they're actually doing their job pretty damn well. Like, I'll be the first to stick up for them about it. And when you go off about them about a frickin' throw-in that you may or may not have got the direction of a throw-in that may or may not have been correct, no, that's when I will get protective
as well.
But yeah, if you're interested, look out for Georgia Soccer. They'll be putting some stuff out about classes coming up this summer. You'll need to referee, sign up as a grassroots referee, and there's a certification fee at the beginning, but you can usually make that back within the first tournament you work. And there's tons of tournaments in August and September. So if you or your child want to do it, it is great money. For kids especially, you learn a lot of great you learn self-autonomy, you learn self-confidence, and you learn how to manage yourself and others in a situation, because you are dealing with actual people management on the fly. So be on the lookout for all that kind of stuff. And if you follow me, I'll be sharing that stuff throughout the summer as well.
At Bartimus Prime 19, according to Doug McIntyre, within the last minute, USMNT will use mostly, if not entirely, different squads for Nations League Final and Gold Cup. Huh. Anthony Hudson will stay through both events under contract through August 1st. No deal is close with Jesse Marsh or anyone else. So that
does. There were reports not too long ago that said Hudson wanted to use the same, but I think that makes more sense, and I kind of like that we've seen that from the U.S. that we get the striated rosters, because I think as we go into 2026, giving the stars the biggest games is going to make more sense than forcing them into these Gold Cup competitions. But it also allows guys like a Brandon Vasquez to shine, because he does deserve a look. I know the striker depth chart has changed significantly in the past week, but he's still in there. He's still in there. Yep.
All about Crute.
Always be Cruton. But Vasquez is also a recruit. That's the thing, is he's a guy who you need to recruit, bring up, and if it's he and Ferreira in the Gold Cup, that's great, because that gives them legitimate time to stake their claim. And obviously, you have to look at the two as vastly different types of levels of competition, but that doesn't mean that it's not valuable minutes for those guys, because hopefully they are able to use that and put it to good use. It makes a lot more sense to do it this way. I was shocked when Hudson said there wouldn't be a difference. I was like, I don't know about that. I don't know if Christian Pulisic wants to go play frickin' Curacao
Antigua or Buda.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that's on his anyway.
No.
Yeah, I think Miles will be part of the Nations League roster. I don't think Miles is part. I think Miles is very solidly in the first 26 guys that you're calling up for the top team, especially right now with a couple of the center backs a little injured. Granted, Mark McKenzie might be number one striker at this point. He scored like 8 goals in the past week. But I think Miles is definitely part of that Nations League roster. I really do. And especially because you don't have Cameron Carter-Vickers or Tim Ream likely a part of this. So I think Miles is part of Nations League.
Go back to work so you don't get in trouble.
Yeah. I'll talk to y'all later.